I'd like to welcome everybody to this evening's town board meeting of Tuesday, May 27th, 2025. We're going to begin this evening in memory of Patrick Malin, a retired highway department employee who had over 20 years of service. Daniel O'Donnell, a retired highway employee who had over 15 years experience. And Frederick J. Postalees III, a retired highway department crew chief who had over 30 years of experience. Our hearts go out to the families and friends and coworkers of all of those gentlemen, and we certainly thank and commemorate them for everything that they did here to help build this town of Amherst. In keeping with commemoration, I wanted to take a moment to thank the Veterans Committee, Councilwoman Berger, Dan Howard, all the people who participated in setting up and putting together our our Memorial Day service, remembrance and wreath laying ceremony. We have traditionally held that at the Williamsville Cemetery. It's the 18th time I've been to it while in office. It really is a special commemorance. It's not big on a lot of pomp and circumstance, but I think it is a wonderful opportunity for us to remember our community members, both those who died in service and gave the ultimate sacrifice for their country, as well as those who have passed on, who were veterans and who have been part of the Lamb Post and Legion, the Jurek Post. Over the years, I've gotten to work alongside a lot of them in various committees or volunteer efforts. And it's always hard to hear those names read, but I want to thank everybody for what I think was a really special ceremony and as always, a very touching remembrance. I'd ask everybody just for a moment of silence for all the men and women in the armed forces who aren't with us because of their sacrifice, and keeping with our Memorial Day theme. With that said, I'd ask everybody to please rise and let's say a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. With that, I would ask our town clerk to please read the roll.
Supervisor Copa. Councilmember Berger.
Here.
Councilmember Zuccalla.
Here.
And Councilmember Marinucci.
And Deputy Supervisor Lavin isn't with us. He's, anybody who doesn't know, he is active Air Force National Guard. So we hope well for Sean, and we look forward to seeing him return at our next meeting. First item on the agenda are our minutes from Monday, May 12th, 2025. I'll motion to adopt those as they appeared.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We have a couple of proclamations and announcements this evening. I'm going to turn it over first to Councilmember Zuccalla.
Hello, everyone. I was honored as the police liaison to attend the Amherst Police Department 2025 Spring Awards and Promotion presentation on May 13th. I will summarize by saying the following individuals received an award. For those of you that may or may not ever have a chance to attend these events, it is very moving, the incredible things that officers do that many of us don't hear about. And I enjoy very much attending this event, having a chance to meet these people and hear the amazing things that they've done in the service of this community. The Chief of Police Citizen Commendation Award went to Bradley Sprague. The Chief of Police Letters of Commendation went to Lieutenant Jared, I believe it's Billica, Police Officer Daniel Cowie, and Police Officer Colton Prost. And there were merit awards awarded to Senior Investigator Brian Kern, Police Officer James Caputi, Police Officer Ryan Conrad, Police Officer Nicholas Guzak, Police Officer John Hawasnek, Police Officer Leo Moe, Police Officer Carlton Probst, Police Officer Derek Westbrook, and Police Officer Stefan Wisniewski. And there were promotions also announced at this event. Investigator Curtis Denzel was promoted to investigator, and promoted to detective were Lawrence Wanat and Lucas Kiefer, and promoted to detective sergeant was Sean Carlson. We congratulate all these people and thank them so much for their service.
And next, Councilmember Marinucci has a recognition.
So on May 18th, the Amherst Youth Consortium held their volunteer appreciation event where we honored 44 outstanding youth for their volunteer work hours over the course of 2024. More than 10, I don't know the exact number, received also the Presidential Medal for the number of hours that they give, including several that were over 100 hours in the single year that they were volunteers. It was wonderful to be able to thank them and be part of what makes our community so special, and also to see so many returning volunteers from the previous years, as well as sibling pairs. So really exciting and proud of all of those youths. And we applaud everyone who has been recognized and excited for next year's event.
With that said, I would like to now move into the public hearings that we have on the agenda tonight. There are two. The first is Resolution 225-498. It's on parking restriction at the dead end of Sierra Drive. I'm going to invite
Second.
all in favor.
Aye.
Good evening, Mr. Supervisor and members of the Town Board. My name is Chris Schregel. I work for the Town of Amherst Engineering Department and act as the Traffic Safety Coordinator. The first public hearing before you tonight is for a parking restriction at the dead end of Sierra Drive. This was brought forth by a Sierra Drive resident where it was reviewed by the Traffic Safety Board at its April 2025 meeting. For those unfamiliar with Sierra, it is located just south of North French, just west of Campbell Boulevard, and is also part of the preserve at Muirwood subdivision, otherwise known as Muirwood Sites C and D. On this screen, it's located to the east. I'm showing you this screen, more of a zoomed out aerial to really reflect what's happening in this entire area with Aspen Heights to the southwest. And there's a multi-use trail that connects the two. This was a requirement of the approval. In that section of Sierra, there is a parking area and a turnaround that was constructed on the west end of Sierra, which includes 6 parking stalls intended for trail access. This is essentially a trailhead of sorts. This is a zoomed in version of the record plan, again showing those 6 parking stalls at the west end of Sierra Drive and its public access to that before mentioned pathway. The resident concern that was brought before the town is that visitors fishing nearby or using the Muirwoods Trail are parking past nightfall, creating disturbances and raising safety concerns for nearby residents. The Sierra Drive resident had no objection to daytime use of this parking area, but is requesting that the town prohibit nighttime parking, similar to other time restrictions posted at town parks. With that, the Traffic Safety Board reviewed this, and they provided a number of recommendations that the Highway Department install a no dumping or no littering sign at the end, and that the town restrict parking between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. for all days, and that applies to the entire dead end area, including the turnaround and parking area. The limits are from the west property line of 254 Sierra Drive to the west property line of 255 Sierra Drive for a total distance of 485 feet. Here is a graphic showing the resolution before you and the recommendation by the Traffic Safety Board. That dashed area shown in red is the recommended parking restriction, again, between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. With that, I'll open it up for questions and comments.
Chris, the first thing that the upper
Oh.
portion or the northern,
It's a typo, I just noticed. It should be 6 a.m. But go ahead.
the northern piece is actually the hammerhead for turnaround for plows.
Yeah, that's correct.
Shouldn't that be parking restricted always? Or at least seasonally?
Yeah, there's no indication that people are parking in there right now. Given that there is parking here and mostly available, nobody is overflowing into that area. It's ultimately up to the highway department to bring that to our attention. Generally, when those go in, it's not an automatic no parking. Certainly could make that permanent, but it's up to the
I'm
board.
looking for a problem where there isn't one. I just questioning if this isn't, if you sign it like this, does it invite people to park there?
Sure. Again, I think they'd focus towards the parking area first. But the entire area would be 10 p.m. to 6 a.m.
I think there's any, I personally don't have an issue with the restriction. I think that makes sense. We close parks, same as a trailer park in this case, so. I don't know what the rest of the board, is there any questions or thoughts from the board?
My only question was, Chris, were the other neighbors noticed? I'm thinking of people with overnight guests that were using that instead of parking along the street. Before we do a parking restriction that may make it easier for them. There are a lot of people who
Yeah.
park on my street, and I would love a little parking area.
They were notified of this public hearing. They were not notified of the Traffic Safety Board. The general rule is those immediately impacted residents are notified. Given that these weren't immediately adjacent, no, they weren't notified.
But within 600 feet was notified for this tonight, okay.
Correct.
All right, with that said, are there people here who have a comment or a thought on this? Sure.
Dave Howard, 194 Raycroft. The only comment I would have is instead of having it 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., why don't you just do dusk to dawn? That way you're covering when it gets darker early through winter. You don't have people parking there saying they can be there at 10 o'clock. I mean, I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Chris, we usually don't do dusk to dawn because of police enforcement.
That's exactly right. So that was discussed by the Traffic Safety Board, and it is allowed by the book to get creative on those signs, but for the same reason you just mentioned, how is the police department going to enforce that? They'd have to use the celestial calendar, which, that would be difficult.
Okay. Anybody else? Seeing none, I'm going to motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And given traffic and safety's recommendation, I'll motion to adopt the recommendations by traffic and safety and enforce the parking restriction.
Second.
Any question? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, resolution 2025-499 is 3230 and 3238 Millersport Highway rezoning. On a motion to open the public hearing at this time.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes, good evening Supervisor Culpa and members of the town board. Sean Hopkins on behalf of the applicant, Emily's Gardens Estates, Inc. We're here this evening in connection with a request to rezone two contiguous properties located at 3230 and 3238 Millersport Highway from R3 to MFR 4A. Just to acclimate everyone where we are, we're located on the west side of Millersport Highway, as you can see here. This particular site, which is depicted here, is currently zoned R3, and as I indicated, the requested rezoning is to MFR 4A, which is the predominant zoning classification, along with other multifamily zoning classifications in that immediate vicinity. An aerial photograph blended in. It is important to note my client owns the adjacent project directly to the north, and this would basically constitute phase 2 of that project, meaning there would be vehicular connections, shared parking, et cetera, et cetera. There's an excerpt of the zoning map. The reason I prepared this was to highlight that if you look at the R3 zoning classification in that area, there's a large assortment of properties nearby, again, that are not zoned that way, primarily located along Millersport Highway. That does include the parcels heading to the north on the same side of the road, which are already zoned MFR 4A, parcel across the street at the corner of North French and Millersport, the greens that you rezoned to MFR 5, and then also MFR 4A 5 in that immediate vicinity. So this is nothing out of the ordinary in terms of the zoning classification that we are requesting.
This motor services currently?
No,
No,
R3.
okay.
R3.
I'm sorry.
What we're proposing here, and again, this will be subject to future review by the planning board because this project will require site plan approval. It's a relatively small scale project, 9 attached residential units. You can see on the concept plan, and we'll be sharing access. DOT did issue a comment to the planning department indicating that's their position that we don't need the additional curb cut. So I envision by the time we get to site plan approval, this will either be no access or gated emergency access only, thereby driving all of the traffic from the 9 units back to the existing driveway on the parcel to the north. We do think it's quite clear that this is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and in fact, the planning board did issue that finding during its meeting a couple of months ago. You have received a detailed letter from Dan Howard, the planning director, explaining the planning board's analysis in support of our position. It's important to note that if you look at figure 6 by itself, which is only intended to be illustrative, it does not designate this site as being appropriate. However, there is a wide assortment of zoning classifications, previous land use decisions. We are serviced by public infrastructure that gives strong justification for this requested rezoning. In that letter that was provided by Mr. Howard, he did cite previous zonings that were approved in that immediate vicinity over the course of the past approximately 25 years. Those include 100 Forest Lake Drive from R3 to MFR 5, which is here. 3160 Millersport from R3 to R4 on November 3rd, 2008. 240 Miller Road, which was rezoned from R3 to MFR 4A on September 8th, 2014. And then finally, 167 and 173 Miller Road, which was rezoned from R3 to MFR 5 by a predecessor town board on September 16th, 2016. So if you look back at the zoning map that would have existed in 1976, all of these parcels along Millersport Highway would have been zoned R3. Now, of course, over the course of nearly 50 years, that has changed. The Millersport Highway frontage in this vicinity has transitioned from predominantly being R3 and single family to multifamily. So our request is consistent with that transition that's occurred over the course of the past nearly 5 decades. As I indicated, the planning board did issue a favorable recommendation that was adopted by a unanimous vote during its meeting on April 27th of this year, provided detailed findings in support of its request, including why it felt that the requested rezoning is consistent with the adopted comprehensive plan. And on the right-hand side, those are those very findings that I've included on the PowerPoint on the left-hand side. And then finally, this is subject to an environmental review pursuant to the State Environmental Quality Review Act. We did submit part 1 of the full environmental assessment form with the rezoning application. This is an unlisted action, meaning it doesn't come with the presumption that there might be potentially significant adverse environmental impacts. We will be required to seek site plan approval from the planning board, which assures everyone that we will be submitting engineered plans, a SWIP, a downstream sewer capacity analysis, et cetera, thereby ensuring compliance with all technical standards. And finally, the planning board did recommend that you issue a negative declaration on April 17th. So in conclusion, it's our perspective that this project clearly will not result in any potentially significant adverse environmental impacts. With all that being said, we're asking you to consider closing the public hearing this evening, and at your next meeting, consider issuing a negative declaration and approval of the rezoning, again, both consistent with the planning board's recommendation by unanimous vote. If there's any questions relative to the presentation or the requested rezoning, I would welcome the opportunity to address them. Thank you.
Sure, Councilman.
As I usually do get calls about housing, I will ask, is this high-end, mid-range, low-end housing? And do you have an idea, 2 questions, how much it might go for and when it might be ready?
So these would be, I would call Councilmember Zucala this to be mid-range. It will be market rate, but not at the very highest end of the market. When this would be ready, the goal would be to obtain site plan approval from the planning board in August and start site work this year. In terms of what they will rent for per square foot, given the current market conditions, what I would estimate is probably $2 per square foot, meaning a 1,000 square foot unit would probably rent for about $2,000, which is not affordable, but given construction costs, it's the only way you can make these projects work.
I understand.
Can you go back to the land use south of this site?
Yep. You want this one, or do you want the, hold on, I think this is better.
Sure. So that's current land use?
Yeah, so that's a plan, that's actually the exhibit that was prepared by the plan department as part of its review, and it's attached to your letter from Dan Howard dated May 15th.
Got it.
And you can see this is all MFR 4A, MFR 5 at the corner, MFR 4A here, MFR 4A. So again, along Millersport Highway, clearly the predominant zoning classification at this point in time in 2025 is multifamily.
All right, there are further questions or comments from this board? We don't typically make a decision on land use items the first night of the public hearing, so I would imagine we'll be closing at most tonight. Are there comments from the audience? Questions from the audience? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to motion to close the public hearing. It says
Second.
decision. Oh, sorry. It says decision date for our first June meeting.
Second.
Oh, it has to be the 23rd. I'm sorry, because it's an evening meeting. So I'm going to revise that motion and set the meeting or set the decision date for the 23rd.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks. All right. The next item on our agenda is public expression. I'm going to motion to open public expression at this time.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I have one list. I think there's a second list. First is Tom Frank.
Good evening, Town Board, Supervisor Brian. My name is Thomas Frank, and I'd like to thank you for my 3 minutes. I've got 3 more minutes over in the village that to give the same presentation. Did you put the graphic up, please? This has to do with the is the graphic up there?
We got to switch over the whole system.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. I just want you to know that the CFA, the Consolidated Funding Application, they're going to have all the state agencies at the meeting on June 11th, Wednesday. And if anyone would like to go, this is the regional, the REDC, the Regional Economic Development Council. And as far as an application having to do with the town of Amherst, the Glen Park Joint Board connection to the Amherst State Park as a lead agency for a 5-year, $10 million capitalization of, you can go to the next one, of the, that's not it. Darn, I'm sorry. Here we go. I'm sorry. This has to do with the New York State Parks, Trails, and Historic Preservation. And that it has to do with a connection of Ellicott Creek to the Niagara Watershed Greenway, Parks and Trails. This is a development project with Google Maps for a statewide environmental education program that this will be tied into. As far as the Glen Park Joint Board, the LWRP for the village and the town, we just met as far as their plan, the community plan for the local waterfront revitalization plan. As far as the historic preservation, what's important is that the New York State Governor, Kathy Hochul, apologized to the indigenous Native Americans for the the Indian people for the institutional practice of cultural genocide. That you have here history that goes back 10,000 years at the intersection of Ellicott Creek and Main Street, the Onondaga Escarpment. It's a National Historic Landmark
Thank you.
that has significance.
Tom, thank you.
Great, you're welcome.
The town will have somebody at that CFA.
Right, this goes through 2015.
Understood. Thank you, Tom. Okay. Got it. Thanks. Ronald Reed? You got, okay. And then Chris. Okay. Okay. Spike Burtis?
My name is Spike Murtis, and good evening, Superintendent Culpa and the town board members. I live at 170 Troydale Way, and to be publicly transparent, my surname is Joseph Murtis. At the last town board meeting on May 12th, you said that you, Superintendent Culpa, and the board were transparent in your decision-making of the town board's business. It's interesting to note that Webster's Dictionary definition is having the property of transmitting light without appreciable scattering so that bodies lying beyond are seen clearly, or pellucid. I guess you think by passing monetary resolutions behind closed doors and then announcing that you have advised the citizens of Amherst of what you have done. Seeing the announcements in the Bee, the Buffalo News, and the local TV is your idea of transparency after the art of the deal has been signed, sealed, and delivered. So we, the citizens of Amherst, need to know before the deal, not after it. The sweetheart deal of gifting $7.8 million purchase of Westwood Country Club will only be given to Mr. Poloncarz in Erie County. Now, we, the citizens of Amherst, find out from reading the Buffalo News and local TV after the agreement was made, not before. So much for pellucid or transparency. Now we hear that Jack Nicklaus and his renowned golfing company to peruse the course to see what has to be accomplished, being the town was lost on what they were going to do with Westwood Country Club as a whole, maybe a hole in one. Add this to the opportunity of receiving funding for historical building status for the clubhouse. You, the town board, rescinded funding for $11.4 million for musical fair theater project and lease for $1 a year, only after possible petition for a recall vote. So much for transparency until your cards were called on this. Let me add the remediation of the grounds would require a possible Superfund contaminated soil. I will call to mind a remediated site near where I lived in North Carolina. The remediation process, or for those not aware of, takes some multiple years to do. If you plan on having a walking park and a splash pad at Westwood, it will not be ready in a year as you and Poloncarz propose. Let me get back where I was at. So, I suggest after 10 years of total disregard or planning for the usage of Westwood, the board should move forward with bringing the course up to date for an 18-hole premier course, and redoing the clubhouse would be the smartest thing to do for the town of Amherst with a lot less possible hiccups, and keeping it under control of the Amherst, not Erie County. Let me paint you a picture of the Transparency Town Board as a former artist and an illustrator. An old gold galvanizing bucket containing dirty water with the Amherst citizen name on the bucket, with an old mop with the Amherst Town Board name on the handle lying next to it. I think you get the picture of your so-called transparency and behind closed board deals. Thank you, Town Board.
Great, thanks. Anybody else?
John Traver, Mount Vernon Road. Just a couple of nice things to say. I apologize for not saying this earlier. Thank you for the stop sign at Kings Highway in Brantwood. Your approval went over well. The residents appreciate it, and it made the neighborhood safer. So I want to thank you for that. Secondly, I attended the Memorial Day service at the Waynesville Park that Mr. Culpa had mentioned. And it was nice to see a congressman, the state senator, county executive, and the whole town board. It made it a special thing, so your presence was much appreciated on that. Just on another note, I have 3 questions, and just looking for some answers. Today, there was an executive session for the town board, supposedly a land transfer or a couple land transfers. I'm wondering, when will the public be made aware of what was discussed and what the outcome of this discussion was? The second question is, in the 2025 Capital Improvement Project Program, I guess it's Resolution 2025-394, there was no allocation for a senior shelter or the North Forest Park renovations. And then this CIP was amended to transfer over $1 million for both of these projects. Is this reallocation okay, and does it comply with New York State Controller's rules? And the third question is, what is the status of the Eggert Road Community Center? Is this project fully approved and fully funded? Thank you.
Anybody else? Seeing none, I'm going to motion to close public expression.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I did, during work session, mention that the two properties we discussed, one was an update for the board on Boulevard Mall. And the process, we still have a process in front of us to try to make that happen. And there's some conversations with the development community. Within the development community, I'm not necessarily between us, but between developers. I'm not at liberty to discuss, but we will be surely making that known as soon as we think that we know, what's going to happen there. The second was with the gun club, which you've asked about in the past, and there was we've been passing information back and forth with the with a likely developer for that facility, for a sports facility. There was basically they kind of agreed to the town's price, so we're just an update on that process. But thank you for asking that. I will also mention that the CIP reallocation does go through council. It is staying within recreation and resident services, and it's all staying in the general fund, so it's not a reallocation to other funds. And the last thing I'll mention is Eggertsville. This town board adopted the lease. That project is moving forward. Next on the agenda is the consent agenda. I'm going to ask our town clerk to please read tonight's consent agenda.
Councilmember Marinucci, 1. Town Attorney, 3. Town Clerk, 1, 2, 3, 4. Controller, 1. Contract Compliance, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Engineering, 1, 2, 3, 4. Highway, 1, 2, 3. Human Resources, 1. Information Technology, 1. Planning, 1, 2. Police, 1, 2, 3, 4. Senior Services, 1, 2. Sewer, Plant 16, 1, 2. Communications, 1 was consent. The second was referred to Attorney, Engineering, and Planning. And the third referred to Attorney, Engineering, and Planning. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'm going to motion the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We do have a couple of items that were not on consent agenda this evening. The first is resolution 2025-501, North Bailey Senior Shelter. It's a bond resolution in the amount of $335,000. This project will see the North Bailey facility turned into a senior center, inclusive of a shelter. The shelter is an outcome from some winter storm planning or recovery and disaster planning that we've been doing, related to us having a senior center, which is geographically located in the center of the town, although in some snow emergencies, very hard to access, especially by our first responders in the fire districts nearby. So this will create both a shelter plus our senior center, which oftentimes is at capacity. We'll be occupying the building. That changes and it's a shift from any lease structure that was previously in place. So we would expect that that we will now have that building available for senior events following some rework that needs to happen in order for that to be the case. So I will motion first to adopt the seeker findings associated with the project.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And next, I'm going to motion the bond resolution.
Second.
And on the question, I would ask our town clerk for a voice vote.
Supervisor Culpa,
Yes.
Councilmember Berger,
Yes.
Councilmember Zucala,
Yes.
Councilmember Marinucci.
Yes.
Next item on the agenda is Resolution 2025-502, North Forest Park renovations as a bond resolution in the amount of $325,000. This is also reallocated inside of our CIP. In this case, there's a grant that is being relocated from Central Park. It's the splash pad that is being reallocated to North Forest Park to complement the pool. We are in need of some renovations to that pool facility, and we have an additional grant, private grant for playgrounds. This will match some of those and see renovations to that existing facility. So I'm going to first motion to adopt the seeker findings associated with the project.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next, I would motion to adopt the bond resolution as it appears.
Second.
And I would ask our town clerk for a voice vote, please.
Supervisor Culpa,
Yes.
Councilmember Berger,
Yes.
Councilmember Zucala,
Yes.
and Councilmember Marinucci.
Next item on our agenda is the second round of public expression. I'm going to open that, a motion to open that at this time.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Matt Plunkett, North Hill Drive. A couple of weeks ago, I stood up here and took issue with an editorial in the Bee. I find myself doing the same thing tonight. The May 1st edition of the Bee had its editorial headlined, "Residents should be thinking of future generations." And the upshot of the editorial decried the failure of musical theater to go forward at Amherst Central Park, and that the museum folks decided not to move the museum to the park. And essentially they blamed it on what they called a vocal minority of people who don't want their taxpayer money spent on anything they don't want it spent on, which is, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but that seemed to be the essence of the article. It turns out that it looks very much, at least in my opinion, that for one thing, the town board could have gone ahead and held the referendum if they'd wanted to on that. I think the reason they said they didn't want to is they didn't want to spend the money to fund the referendum. They were willing to spend $11 million on the theater, but not a couple of grand to run the referendum. If they'd have run the referendum, it would have gotten mulched, and that's why they didn't go forward with it. You know, musical theater eventually moved out of Amherst altogether. That's true. They moved to 710 Theater in Buffalo, and it turned out it was a win-win-win situation. It was a win for the taxpayers who avoided another $11 million of debt loaded onto their shoulders by this board. Musical Fair Theater moved into a very fine facility that's up and operating right now, and they didn't have to wait a couple of years for it to be built. And 710 Theater got an additional 90 days of performances in a theater where there was nothing else booked for it. So it worked out fine for everybody else. And actually the visitors to the theater did well too, because no matter which way you walk from 710 Main Street Theater, there's a restaurant within many fine restaurants within 4 blocks, no matter which direction you go. If you came out of 710 Theater, or if you came out of the new Musical Fair Theater over here at Westwood that was going to be built, the only thing that would have greeted you on a warm summer night was the smell of the cow dung from the animals that were going to be moved there as part of the menagerie for the museum. Yeah, they took the residents to task for going to court to challenge the secret review of the moved by the museum, and the court ruled that it was spot zoning. And the B seemed quite upset about the fact that the residents went to court to challenge a move that the court found illegal. I find that odd. And if the town board didn't think that the ruling was proper, they could have easily taken up on appeal, and I don't believe they did that. So I have trouble understanding where the B goes with this stuff. They criticize the people who have been in here talking week after week about the issues in the town as failure to plan ahead for future generations. They are looking at future generations. They're looking at a debt load that has already doubled under this town board and is going nowhere but higher. That's what they're looking at.
Thank you.
John Traver, Mount Vernon. I'm sorry, I just want a little clarification on those bond resolutions, because I thought you said that the money was not reallocated for one of the projects. So for the North Forest Park and for North Bailey, are they both new bonds? Or are they reallocated from other bonds?
They're both reallocated from the original Central Park bond.
Okay, and is that reallocation okay as far as the New York State Controller's Office? There's no rules that are broken?
No, we followed
Okay,
them.
all right, thank you. And then regarding the North Bailey shelter, it's interesting because the police training facility, which is rather large, that could suffice for a winter shelter at any time. And they've got more than enough amenities for a lot more people than you could stuff into that community center. And along with that shelter being redone at North Bailey, will O'Connell and Company still be a tenant there?
So I'll answer all those questions. I'm going to wait till the end. Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening again. Let me continue to the board. The lease of $7.18 million Royal Park renovation only to be given to $1 per year lease to Damon University, with Damon having control of scheduling of the field. So who do we contact for scheduling an event at Royal Park facilities? Damon University, the Amherst Parks, or Ghostbusters? Another item, let's look for a field sponsor. Dick's, REI, Cabela's, even Pepsi or Coke to post their name high, like Highmark, for the Bill Stadium to help pay for the maintenance of the field, not in the general fund. Sure hope the board is awake and already doing this. It's a no-brainer, yet nothing has been mentioned as it is reaching completion. Compare this to the Audubon golf profits going to the general fund with no real improvements to the golf course. Yet you, the town board, increased senior passes to $599, while 2025 Elma Meadows Grover combo for $365, and those two courses are far better than what we're playing on at Audubon. So, from experience on both courses, Elma Meadows is far superior no matter what. It's the best course in the county for a public course. So, Audubon is nothing but a cow pasture. You do the math. So should we not forget the $31 million deal with NYSEG for purchasing streetlights? We're paying $1.4 million in interest on this bond resolution alone for 2024. Shed some light on that deal and read them in the week. newly signed lease with Ellicott Development for a youth center for yet-to-be-built building for $28,000 per month for 10 years, totaling $3.36 million. The transparency of this one. Imagine buildings. I can see clearly now. Now, might I suggest you review your town board minutes of when these resolutions were passed and when they were initially read for discussion. They were all passed unanimously by the board without any initial discussion with the public. Your idea of transparency is not before but after the fact. The scattering of the bodies is the Amherst taxpayer you claim to represent, AKA Pellucid. Think again before you divulge a job you have done publicly after you have passed the resolution without addressing the public concerns until after the passage. And don't forget to pat yourself on the back when you leave tonight.
Seeing none, I'm going to move to close public expression.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So again, on the, both bonds were reallocated from a single bond. Those, and some of the money was reallocated to Royal Park a couple weeks ago. So, not Royal Park, sorry, Paradise. So there are 3 that had reallocation from that bond. The Bailey project, or the Bailey Police Center, isn't used as a shelter. First, we don't have a commercial kitchen in there. We could put a commercial kitchen in there, but it serves as our it serves as our emergency operations center. So basically, we have ongoing emergency operations, which is police, fire, emergency services, and it operates as both. In that case, it can operate as a phone bank. It can operate but it is the emergency ops center, and the police use that facility during emergencies. So this is the better option. But again, we need additional senior center and senior services, so it works out well. The O'Connell and Company will, if they remain in any location in the town, they'll be a vendor the same way other people are vendors, and they'll rent the space. Basically the same way somebody would rent the space at the senior center if they wanted to use it. Which is the same way people rent Royal Park. You call the rec department. The rec department controls time on Royal Park, just like it does North Forest, Northtown Center. And in the same light as Northtown Center, we will also be RFPing for the naming rights to the field at Royal Park. And that's always been something we plan to do. And Damon will be paying, as is stated in their lease, for all the maintenance and upkeep via a paid use per time, whether it's monthly or by the use, the same way everybody else will. So thank you for that. I'm going to motion to adjourn the board meeting.
Second.
All in favor?